Thank you, everybody, for the next session. Going to welcome back Ed Neilan from Nord. I don't know if we did a proper introduction. Ed is Chief Scientific Officer and Medical Officer for Nord. So welcome, Ed. And after his presentation, Aliza Fink from Nord is going to take over. Aliza is Director of Research Program and oversees strategic development, growth, and implementation of Nord research and scientific activities. And she works closely with RDCA-DAP.
Great, thanks, Alex. Thank you in advance to Aliza, who helped prepare these slides and who's going to give the second half of this presentation. So it's really a tag team thing here. So there's Aliza's picture up there, and she'll be up here in a minute. Next slide, please. Oh, all right, thanks, beautiful. That's great because some of them are animated. Clicker is the left-right buttons. Okay. You can see the title of our talk up there, which is the centrality of patient advocacy organizations in accelerating treatments for rare diseases. I don't know whether Aliza got this picture from the Webb Space Telescope or someplace else. But after the talks earlier today, some of which got down into the weeds and some of the data, we thought by this point in the agenda, it would probably be time to stop, think about the big picture again, and why we're doing this and who the stakeholders are and who the partners that we need to make this successful are. This is an illustration of the drug development process, and it's way too small for you to read. And Teresa went through a similar diagram with subpages and a lot of detail earlier. So I'm not even going to try to go through all these steps and don't think I really need to in this audience. But it's a little bit of a reminder here in this context that FDA is a critical partner in the development of additional treatments and a partner in the RDCA-DAP. Also, as discussed earlier, the pharmaceutical and biotech industries play a critical role, and academics interested in rare diseases play a critical role, as do, of course, patient advocacy organizations, or as many of you know, sometimes individual patients and families make a decisive difference and drive a program forward. We'll focus most of the rest of this conversation on what patients and patient advocacy organizations can do and what support and education they might still need to help them do that to even a greater extent and to do it faster. So patient advocacy organizations can play a central role at many of the steps in that drug development process, again, as outlined by Teresa earlier. Patient advocacy organizations are obviously builders of the rare disease community. They bring the lived experience to patient-focused drug development. Oftentimes, given the vast number of rare diseases and the limited interest currently shown by funders and industry in all but the top 100 or 200 rare diseases, they often bring, patient-reported data that fills a critical gap. They bring motivation and determination to get someone interested in their disease and get a program off the ground. And they are often the leading funders for their particular rare disease and promoters of research. This slide, also credit to Aliza, is animated. I have to click several times here, but just to highlight some of that. So obviously the PAGs play an important role in patient-focused drug development and meetings around that. Oftentimes for their rare disease, they provide funding and or carry out research. Many have created or otherwise activated biorepositories, having learned from research-ready type programs, which NORD and other organizations do run, that can be a valuable tool. We know that many are conducting or sponsoring their own natural history studies. You'll hear a little bit more from Aliza about the NORD I Am Rare platform, and there are other ways, of course, to do that as well. Clinical outcomes assessments are often lacking or not yet validated for rare diseases, and there are clinical trials that failed that could possibly have done better if there was a more appropriate, clinical outcome measure. With 7 or 10,000 rare diseases and limited funding, again, it's oftentimes the PAGs who are driving the possible development of more suitable clinical outcome assessments. And patients and their advocates play a critical role in the enrollment of a typical rare disease trial. I will tell you, one of the first things I did when I joined Genzyme 17 years ago was walk into a clinical trial that had been planned to be enrolled in 12 months. And, this was Genzyme, perhaps the most successful of the, developers of treatments for rare diseases, and 20 years after their first one, planned to be enrolled in 12 months. It actually took 26. I came in at about month 10, and we had to activate whole new, ways to enroll enough patients to do a gold standard, double-blind, placebo-controlled global clinical trial for a rare disease with a significant number, of patients. The feasibility assessments that set up that trial probably should have paid more attention to the patients. Centers of excellence have been developed for individual diseases or disease groups. I won't talk about it today, but NORD has recently launched a program to try to fill some of the gaps with the concept of a general rare disease center of excellence. But it's positioned here on the slide in terms of when you have a treatment, we better have experts at administering it, but also, of course, centers of excellence are also involved for their relevant diseases in the design and execution of clinical trials. So for a lot of the rare diseases, these steps wouldn't happen, or they would take much longer if the patients and their advocates weren't driving these things. So the next slide is a little bit of a health check and kind of how are we doing in supporting patient advocates, and this is, broadly speaking, all of us together, the global we. How are we doing in supporting patient advocates? Recently, in 2022, NORD conducted a bit of a survey of other patient advocacy organizations. Some of our 300 and something member organizations, also patient advocacy organizations that are not currently NORD members. Some of the questions that they were asked are related on this slide. Didn't realize this one is animated too. The first 3 of these have one color scheme where orange is the group has reported this is still challenging for them and they need help with this, whereas blue is something that the patient advocacy organization says they do well and they know how to do it. That's a strength for them. So advocating for someone to help develop a drug for their disease is a challenge for the majority of patient advocacy organizations in the rare disease space. Conducting or getting someone to conduct a natural history study of disease is also a challenge for the majority of the diseases and patient advocacy groups. Basic research, a little bit more 50-50. There, I guess you have to find at least one interested researcher and encourage them, or maybe fund them. It's a little more tractable than some of the other stuff, but even there, it's a challenge. Now, this last frame has a different color scheme. I apologize for that. The color scheme is actually sort of reversed, where orange is, well, this is well developed, and the other colors for ensuring that you have a good clinical outcome assessment, something that could be an endpoint for your clinical trial, is either need help or still in development for the vast majority, as the patient advocacy organizations themselves have assessed this. So I'm going to use this as my pivot to invite Aliza to come up and talk about programs at NORD, and complete that pivot by saying, in order to help the patient advocacy organizations who are critical and irreplaceable, because I don't think that it would happen for the majority of the diseases if we just left it to purely commercial interests, at least not at the current time. We have to provide, education and support, including education and support that really makes this particular program, RDCA-DAP, something that they understand and join us in. So, Aliza, please come on up.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you all for this opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the specifics. We've established the fact that all these stakeholders are critical. We've established that our stakeholders are telling us that they need things from us. And so here's an opportunity to really think about RDCA-DAP as its foundation with the data and the analytics that we've been talking about, but really thinking about all the other pieces that need to come together to make this a success. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time now sort of thinking and talking about some of those examples. Okay, and so the first one is really around this idea of education, and really to be able to have these productive conversations with our community, really thinking about what are the pieces in education that we need to think about? And as we sort of plan and think about our educational activities, really thinking and making sure that they're foundational, that we're really recognizing the heterogeneity of our community and really thinking about how do we meet everybody where they are. We know our end goal. We really want everyone to have everybody who wants it to have a robust understanding about this process. But we know that everybody's at a different place right now. And so really thinking about how to bring everybody to that common place, making sure that these materials are relevant, because the people who are learning this material, they want it to impact their lives. They want to be able to use it. And so the goal is to have information that then empowers them to action. And so I just want to share a couple examples of some materials that have been produced as part of the RDCA-DAP to really think about, to really sort of help our community as a whole. And so this is one example that I wanted to share with you. And this is a one-page infographic that sort of starts to sort of give the overview of what the drug development process is and help give people some context of what's involved, what's entailed, why is it hard, how does it work, to really, again, start to build some of that knowledge base. And then a second example was actually going even a little further back and really thinking about this broader question around data literacy and thinking about how do we even start that conversation. And so this is a screenshot from a video that we produced, really around some of these really basic questions of what is data? How is data used to produce information? And then how do we take that information and create knowledge to really, at a really basic level, what makes data good? How can we make data better? How do you think, what does it mean to standardize data? To really start with this foundational understanding, to get all of it, to get the entire community to that combined place where we can really have those productive conversations. And then has been alluded to in a couple of places today, really creating opportunities for self-paced learning. And this is a screen that sort of shows the portal to a learning management system that really allows people at their own pace, as they're interested, to really dive into. And so here's sort of showing two key topics. One about, how do you form a patient advocacy group? How do you become a 501c3? And there's a lot of steps that unless you've all of a sudden found yourself in this space, you may not know. And the same thing for what does it mean to be, as an organization, to be ready to do research? What are the steps? What does it entail? And so really just trying to really create this broad framework of opportunities for everybody within the community. And then, because we couldn't not talk a little bit about data, really thinking about data collection. And so this is sort of, at NORD, we run what we refer to as the IMRARE program, which contains a registry platform that's been in existence since about 2014. And this is really a way to really allow patient advocacy groups to start building the data that we've been talking about today. And, and thinking about creating a program that really encompasses all the aspects that are necessary to really build a strong registry and natural history study. So thinking about the education that is needed for, for patient advocacy groups. What's a consent form? What needs to go into a consent form? What's a study protocol? What's involved? This is really a collaboration between NORD, the patient advocacy group, the patient advocacy group's community through advisory boards, through medical advisors, for patient and community advisors, through other patient advocacy groups who are also on this journey together, and really building that shared learning across the community. Thinking about expectations and sort of helping people understand what's involved in this process. And then key are the tools and templates, because these, as we talked about, what's the basis of a consent form? What should that look like? What should our data standard, what should our data standards, and what models should we be using, and how should we be collecting data? And how do I think about building it? What does it mean? What's a validated instrument? How do I think about these things? What are the tools that are needed? But also recognizing that every group is different, and we need to have a system that allows each group to really reflect their key concerns and the things that are important to them. And all of this really empower it, to empower, these are the patient advocacy groups, this is their data, they own it, and then it's their choice to really think about how they want to use it, share, and that's where the conversations around sharing with our RDCA-DAP come in, and them thinking about how to leverage this data and the power of this data. And then sort of really thinking about, deciding to share data. That is an amazing step, but we also know that's not the last step in this process. And so really thinking about how do we help our groups go from the decision to share to the actuality of sharing. And so for that, thinking about creating support around data contribution. What do the forms and templates need to look like for what they're sharing? How do we the actual extraction of data from the IMRARE system into the C-Path system, and thinking about, how do we create standard formats? How do we send that in a format that C-Path is going to be able to be like, oh, great, now I can work with this, and sort of helping them through all of those processes, helping to build trust with the community by embedding in this whole process methods for data de-identification and removing of any PHI or PII. And then also starting to think about dashboards so they can see what's happening with their data and understand the impact. And so really sort of kind of thinking about all of these things from all of those perspectives. And then I just wanted to share a little bit about something that we've started working on and thinking about, as we start thinking about this data and this data going to FDA, we've started some work working with CDISC to develop a therapeutic area user guide to really start to think about, well, what, as we think about data, we want this data to be used, to be leveraged, to be submitted to FDA, really thinking about starting to develop that data framework. And so recognizing rare diseases is huge. We were not going to be able to ever create something that was going to encompass everything. And so we really wanted to think about something that was really going to start to highlight the things that are different about rare diseases, and the things that if the rare disease community doesn't think about, isn't going to exist. And so starting to think about what we can do there. And so the way we sort of framed it was really thinking about some key things and some key places where rare diseases are different. Thinking about things about the fact that 70% of rare diseases do have a genetic basis. Thinking about things like, oh, gene therapies may be coming down the line. What do we need to think about in that space when it comes to data standards? And so starting to build that framework, and starting to really think about what the variables are, how do we think about variables to start building these standards. And really all of this is really to the purpose of really making sure that we are thinking about accelerating drug development and thinking about the RDCA-DAP really from a 360-degree perspective, and making sure that we're really encompassing all the activities that are necessary to make this project a success and to accelerate cures. So thank you. It's been I don't know who's next. Oh, we're doing okay. Do you want to come back? I don't know. I don't know where this is going.
Question, and maybe it's to you or Ed. I mean, either way. But it has to do with the survey results that you were showing.
Yep.
Aliza and Ed. Can you say a little bit about who was? I mean, you mentioned members and non-members. Was that one respondent for a disease area, and was it patient advocacy groups? Was it combination of patients and drug sponsors, and who was
okay, sure. Sorry. Yeah, I was so it is patient advocacy groups, and this is one response per patient advocacy group.
Well, I have to say that with one of my other hats on, my patient focused drug development hat on, that I wondered about one of the pie charts.
Okay.
And it was one where you have patient groups developing COAs.
Right.
And it looks like there's a lot of activity there. That's technically challenging work. And what we see, and we've done, this survey, and we'll do it again in a few years, of patient experience data, as it's called by law. And, of course, PROs, I mean, you can consider COAs to be. We get a fair amount now, and we're getting more. A challenge is that it's not always as usable as we would like it to be. It's not always developed well. I don't know if you're covering in your training, or if you ask people about their use of or awareness of the series of guidances that we're developing, patient-focused drug development guidances.
Right.
That the one that's out in draft now is about COA development.
Right.
And it's really, we tend to think of it's got to have a technically sophisticated audience, because it's a lot of work, and it's a lot to put on people who are already resource challenged. And there might already be measures out there that they could use and not make new ones. So what can you say more about what you think was being expressed there when they were saying that there are all these people developing them? Some of them have got it done. Michelle may either want to pile on or object. I don't know what she's going to do, but here she is.
Go for it.
I think it's great that I think what Teresa's saying, and this is from my reviewer hat, right? So
okay.
When I see the stuff that comes in, is what we are seeing is an emergence of groups who want to include utilities of clinical outcome assessments into natural history protocols. That they think that these may end up being the endpoint into a trial, but we don't have a trial, right? So it's the future planning of the unknown, and it may not actually be the correct concept to measure. And so those are the things we see. We also see that it doesn't have the regulatory rigor to meet our CFR standards. And so we do have things that are described in law that we have to follow. I do think that the work, and I'm going to pick on Lindsay because she's to my left, that the Rare Disease COA Consortium is trying to do is to kind of help with that, which is trying to develop a what's the word I'm looking for?
Resource.
Thank you, resource. I was thinking the Excel spreadsheet from last week you shared. Not that. The resource is actually trying. It's a consortium that is with industry. NORD's part of it. FDA is part of it, and it is to develop a resource of really a communication tool of COAs to start that conversation. For coming to the agency, for maybe with a patient group to say, does this make sense with your disease? And it's in its infancy, and it hasn't been published yet, but it has been looked at by external experts and a lot of folks. So I think it's great that patient groups want to embrace developing outcomes, because we hear that there's nothing there sometimes, or why not. I encourage our groups to think about how they can contribute in the spectrum of that development aspect, because there is a spectrum, like in PFDD and drug development, it's a spectrum as well. There's a spectrum and opportunity where patients are extremely critical in that development piece, and perhaps we can have them leverage where they are the best fit in that development paradigm, and then not have to worry about like some of these really technical things that we need some scientists for and things like that. So I think there's some really great opportunity. I'm glad to hear they're talking about it and they recognize it, and I think that's part of the mobilization and the impact of PFDD. But I just want to make sure that they're utilizing their resources and time in a way that's going to benefit them the most in the long run. I think it can be done in that front. We just have to make sure it's the right piece of that development spectrum. So,
well, I mean, I agree with what you just said. Maybe that was a nicer way to put it, but I'd be worried that people would put a lot of work into something,
So
and
I
then
should probably,
it wasn't as usable as they wanted it to be.
right. I should probably clarify that we, this was not necessarily their work.
Oh, they're okay.
So this was sort of, in your sort of sphere. So it wasn't necessarily that they themselves were, and I will also acknowledge that this survey was done pre-release of guidance. So this was, I think, just sort of a space for them to listen. People know, we're getting to the point where people are actually understanding the terms. They're responding. We didn't get all of don't know what this is.
Okay.
So we saw that as sort of a good, but yes, take that with some maybe a whole salt shaker.
So they're aware there might be some work underway. Yeah. No, I think they obviously are absolutely critical to inform that work, but there's some parts of it that would be a lot to ask.
Right.
Patients to take on themselves.
100%.
Yeah.
It looks like it's gonna.
Up just to give the same answer that Aliza gave. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear, but I thought I said, according to the PAGs, this is what they believe is ongoing for their disease.
All right. All right. Thanks, everyone.